coming. This is our penultimate forum. Next week, we will have Nikia, who is our own parishioner, who's about to publish a book. And Nikia will talk to us about which is truth telling, which is very much a part of the Black tradition, and which is how we tell our stories. But for today, I want to introduce you to Joy, who is standing right in front of you. This is Joy Williams. And Joy has been a member of the Episcopal Church of St. Paul's and St. James in New Haven for over 20 years. And she's worked for 40 years as a physician associate. And for over 16 years, she's worked in hematology and oncology at the Smilo Cancer Hospital. But what she's doing here today has more to do with the work that she has done over the years. And she says this has mainly come about through work that she spent looking at archives, which led her to a curiosity about the lives of enslaved persons in colonial Connecticut. And so she has gotten involved with a collaboration with the New Haven Museum and the Witness Stones Project. And I think you remember the Witness Stones Project from our friend Sharon Pearson, who did one in Wilton. And there have been many witness stones done in Guildford. If you ever want to go see one, go visit Guildford. They have done a number of witness stones. Wilton just did one. And in the Episcopal Church, we've had two other churches that have done work on their history. Essex, and someone who came to speak to us because we have just started doing our history. We have the history project here at St. Paul's where we have just, we've done a lot of our research, and our hope in April is to present to the congregation some of what we have discovered. One of which is that most of our priests had at least one enslaved person.
So the Wang had an enslaved person? Oh.
Surprise?
No.
Yes.
So, as you know, we talked about, Father Daniel mentioned this morning, this resolution from the Episcopal Church, because the Episcopal Church has taken a step forward and has decided that reparations is important. And for a long time, people have struggled with the issue of what does it mean? How are you going to do this? Why do you even want to think of doing this? But the Episcopal Church nevertheless has decided to take a step forward. And it's not like they're alone, because they've been in other countries it's being done as well. And so the church in England, for example, recently in Barbados, and I know this because my father went to and was trained as a priest at Quadranton Seminary. And they have decided that that would be how they would give reparations back, to give money towards the ordination of priests of color in Barbados. So it can be done in many ways. So Joy this morning is coming to raise with us questions about reparations, things to think about, and then we hope that in April we'll have a bigger discussion, not just with us, but we hope that we will be able to invite other churches in our region, because that's the other thing, we belong to a region. Doesn't always feel that way, but we do. We belong to a region that stretches from Greenwich all the way to Danbury and includes Bridgewater. So, we don't know those people very well, but we need to get to know them because they're part of who we are. So we are hoping that we'll be able to, talk with them about this issue. So Joy, without further ado, Joy Williams.
Good morning, everyone.
Yay, Joy!
So I gave out a handout that is a copy of resolution number 7, which was voted on in 2020 by, can you hear me okay?
Sure.
Yes. Oh, great. by General Convention, acknowledging and confronting systemic racism, white supremacy, and anti-black bias. And so one of the parts of this resolution was to create a reparations task force. And I'm just going to read a paragraph from the September 22nd, 2023 report of the Reparations Task Force. Through all of these efforts, we have discerned that we have much work to do. ECCT still has significant work to do in order to begin reaching the goals of Resolution 7 from the Convention of 2020. The reality is that the discussion of reparations is a part of a process which includes truth-telling, storytelling, forgiveness, and reconciliation as the prelude for the discussion of reparations. In recognition of that reality and being attentive to the voices of the many who are seeking action in response to our 400-plus year history of slavery and anti-black bias, the task force has proposed a resolution establishing a reparations fund with an initial investment of $2.5 million, representing an approximate tithe drawn from non-directed diocesan endowments, along with the creation of a reparations board to administer the fund going forward. A second resolution recommending that ECCT allocate a total of $20,000 in 2024 for the purpose of commissioning an historical analysis of the sources of ECCT endowments will assist in guiding the process of ongoing support of the reparations fund. And then the members of the task force are Cheryl Sharp, Esquire, the Reverend Dr. Donald Hamer, co-conveners, the Reverend Whitney Altop, the Reverend Darrell Burke, the Reverend Rowena Kemp, Mr. Thomas Rouse, the Reverend Tracy Johnson Russell, Ms. Valerie Stanley, the Reverend Sandra Stainer, the Reverend Ronald Steed, Ms. Denise Welsh, and Ms. Lisa Yarborough. And so what the Connecticut Reparations Task Force did was they also surveyed other states to see what they were doing. And the states that they looked at were Massachusetts, Maryland, Virginia, and New York. And so when Gail and I were talking on the phone about this, I said, well, Gail, me as not a member of the Reparations Task Force, and as someone who also did not attend General Convention, I still have lots of questions, and I can't imagine that other people don't have lots of questions too. So I think one of the things that would be helpful is to kind of just open the floor and talk about all the kinds of questions that we have. Because I think that will also help, the wardens in the vestry to kind of, to pull together more information. And so that's why I thought it was important to also just take a look at the resolution number 7. Resolved that the 236th Convention declare that social and racial justice are core values rooted in the gospel and central to furthering God's mission in and through the Episcopal Church of Connecticut, and that God calls us to acknowledge, confront, and dismantle racism, white supremacy, and anti-black bias in our nation and in ECCT. And so, just to start off, has anybody thought about reparations or read this before or been at General Convention and kind of have any insights into or questions that they want?
I think that's a great question. Has anyone thought about reparations? Every one of us has thought about it. And where do you go? And I would suggest that I thought of reparations immediately yesterday when I was watching online a Pulitzer group connected with the 1619 project. I don't know whether anyone has seen those. Has anyone? No one here has seen that. My son, who teaches in predominantly black students in Manhattan, told me about this. So at any rate, what I wanted to say, one of the topics was about the black farmers in Louisiana. And I thought, and they have had difficulty getting grants because they've been shut out of grants. It sounds like the color of law. The black farmers are losing constantly grants that would enable them to stay on the land, and blacks are therefore losing land. And I'm thinking, wow, what a great opportunity for reparations. And the connection for me is that blacks came to this country working on the land, all enslaved. And now, today, blacks want to stay, some blacks want to stay on the land, and they're deprived of that. So anyway, so reparations, that's my thought of reparations, is that what a great opportunity to put money into supporting these people who represent the tradition of blacks working on the land. That's where I'll stop at that. So, no one else has thought about reparations? Come on.
So, I was just gonna say during the sermon, Father Daniel mentioned a sum of money that there's a fund, which I was surprised to hear about, millions and millions of dollars, and so, how much is it? $2 million.
Yeah.
They're gonna start at 2.5 million is the first goal post, and that way that will help them to build an endowment.
Yeah, because 2 million is not gonna go very far.
No, it's no, but
I'll take it.
but reparations are gonna be done systematic by groups, I would assume, like what you had mentioned,
Well, I think
not to
they
individuals.
haven't come up with any sort of definitive plans. I think the first step is to say, okay, we if we believe in, you know, getting rid of black and anti-black bias and white supremacy, then we need to do things that tangibly show that we're not just mouthing, you know, that we need to do something that says, yes, we're taking this seriously. And so reparations is seen as a way of doing that. And not, what I liked about what the bishop said at the 175th anniversary recently of the abolition of slavery was that he said, you know, I don't want white people to feel that this is about guilt, because it's not about guilt, and it's not about guilt and shame. It is about doing what is right, and doing what should be done to say, look, I'm sorry this happened. It didn't happen in my time, but it happened in my ancestors' time, and I feel a sense of responsibility, and here's what I want to do to make sure that this does not happen again, one, and two, that anything we can do to take out, you know, to improve the situation, we are willing to do. I think that basically, to me, is what it means.
And Bishop Curry recently, Michael Curry, recently recorded a video, it was attached to our weekly newsletter, asking for folks to contribute to a fund for scholarships for the two historically black colleges, universities that are Episcopalian. I think one of them is in South Carolina, one of them is Voorhees, I can't remember the name of the other one right off the top of my head, but asking for the creation of scholarships for students so that we can actually create a scholarship fund from the state of Connecticut for Connecticut students to attend these two HBCUs. And so that's another hope, is that this money can be used for students to attend college, especially first generation, the first students from their families to attend college.
Do you know, when you were telling us that this, I don't know if the right word, task force, that they were meeting with other people from other states? Is that like Episcopal churches from other states, or is it like, I know there's also things that are like from cities or like state governments. Is it like specifically that they're meeting with other Episcopal dioceses?
Yeah, they're meeting with other Episcopal diocese task forces on reparations.
Yeah, okay.
Specifically, I know that they met with the task force from New York and the one from Massachusetts, because they're both really close, drivable distance.
I think of reparations, and I like the two ideas I've heard surface so far, because in general, when the concept of reparations is put out there, typically in like civil law or criminal law, there's someone who's been aggrieved, right, and then there's a person who committed the crime. So in church communities where people have been, young men have been, affected, the Catholic Church and other churches have had to pay because there's a connection between that individual and whatever. So my challenge is, as an Irish American descendant, I'm not here until 1870, my family. So we had nothing, and a lot of people didn't own slaves. So I like to hear tangible things that feel right versus just try to connect the dots between people paying like everybody, and then how do you determine who is actually a descendant of a slave or not? And that's kind of some of the debate that happens in the general,
Absolutely.
I think that's where reparations and the discussion has often gotten stuck. I'm Italian American, my family came in 1920, blah, 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 blah. And it's like, but that's not it, we have benefited. Even our generation who didn't own slaves, we have benefited from white supremacy in this country. And while others, just generational wealth that we were able to acquire through real estate and other things that were where the Black community was redlined out of housing and stuff. So it's not just going back to slavery. It's even going into the modern era of the wrongs that have been done in our name.
I think these two things can exist together. I think they can exist together. So my point is that some things to me should feel right about how money's spent. And I like those two ideas in terms of the, first generation especially, going to college, those kind of things. Those are the opportunities that need to be broken down, because embracing diversity in corporate America isn't just hiring Harvard MBAs that have two parents that are, Barack Obama's kids. I mean, that's not embracing diversity. That's a skin color embrace, not a socioeconomic embrace. So I like that idea, and I like Gail's thing of Barbados. I think those feel very right to me.
The thing I think about reparations is that you have to look at it within your own context. Every context is going to be different depending on where you live, and I think it's really context related. I mean, a lot of, I listened to the other day on a meeting with the bishop, where a parish that has a ton of money got up and said, well, I hope, how are we going to do this? Are we going to have to take out of our endowment? Because they're more concerned about money coming out of their endowment, and this is a church with money, but that's not the point, and I think first and foremost, I think we have to understand what is meant. For instance, the question of people feeling as if it's money coming out directly from their pocket, and who does it go to? I mean, everybody doesn't expect that they will get 5 cents that belongs from the reparation fund. I think we're looking at what can you do that generationally can correct some of the wrongs. What can you do to perhaps make sure that more kids of color at the lowest level feel that they are absolutely able to go to college, as opposed to not even looking at college simply because they feel I won't have the money, so I won't go, period. So I think it's stuff like that.
Edward, jump in, Edward,
Yeah.
jump in.
Yeah.
He's had it.
Sorry, this is all good, and I mean, the money that 2.5 million, or I believe it was more, 20 million, even that is not sufficient. I mean, this is all in that part, but can I make a suggestion? That I think that we have a big down payment on reparations, and that's the Civil War. That's a part that we kind of skip and do not remember or try to forget. But the actual down payment is already there. Well, can we start, if all these parishes, can we get the names of people who died during the Civil War? And that's the down payment that that's the stepping stone. And once you have that in mind, just $2 million is really nothing, or all the other ways to do it. I think I don't see anything about that here, and I wish that was the first paragraph. This down payment is already there.
I was just going to say that for me, this conversation really connects with the work we've done in Sacred Ground, which is to not only understand the past, but to understand structural racism and to understand what's going on today. And I'm immediately brought to mind, many of you probably have local town blogs that you tune into, go online to, right? So I live in Bridgeport, I live in the Black Rock section of Bridgeport, which is sort of the more white, more privileged, although it's wonderfully integrated as well. But I always watch that blog to see what people are thinking. And so, of course, the big hot issue right now is affordable housing. And when people start writing about it, I just sort of go past a lot of the rhetoric and I try to say, what's the real message here? So the first real message is, we have a beautiful way of life, and we don't want to change that. Our small town sensibilities are faced with. And then you go down a little bit further when people are really heated up and they say, and we don't want to become like Hartford, which is full of drug abusers and rapists. Well, so it's not too far from there to say, can you just please keep the suburbs white? But that will be revealed. And so I really appreciate your point about there's a contemporaneity to what we're talking about, so that, and reparations, as I see it, is a broader concept, because every time we go and fight like heck for affordable housing in our communities, we're fighting for reparations, because we're trying to overcome the structural racism that is keeping us incredibly segregated in this country. And so it's sort of broader than this, but I find it more helpful to think in a contemporary vein, because particularly trying to talk to people for whom this is really new, or they have a lot of triggers about it, it's like they just keep on getting hung up on, well, what happened in 1619 and I didn't really have anything to do with it. And that's like a dead-end conversation. But right now it's going on, so.
So I just want to give just a little kind of a piece of a history of the research that I've been doing about New Haven churches. So Trinity Church is is the oldest Episcopal church in New Haven, and their vestrymen and in particular were owned enslaved people, and were descended from enslavers, and were descended from people who benefited from the slave trade with the West Indies. In addition to that, in 1831, members of the vestry actively fought to kill the establishment of the first black college that would have been founded in New Haven at that time in 1831. And the vote of the freemen of the city, because that's what they were considered at the time, the people who were eligible to vote, was 700 to 4. So obviously it was the vestrymen from Trinity, from United Church on the Green, as well as the mayor and the founders of the Yale Law School. Those were the primary movers and shakers who fomented this vote so that it was so lopsided. And so what that means is that Connecticut lost the opportunity to have the first black college or university. And if you've been looking at the newspapers this weekend, you probably saw that Yale University released a whole report about how they benefited from enslavement, And one of the big stories was Yale's participation in killing the 1831 college. And so Yale is making a commitment of X number of millions of dollars to a relationship with historically black colleges and universities, scholarships for young people who are residents of New Haven to attend HBCUs, and also enrichment programs for New Haven public school children. And so in studying this group of people, one of the other things that I found out that in the 1920s, there were, again, vestrymen, legislators, alders of the city of New Haven who were active participants in the Ku Klux Klan chapter in New Haven, because in the 1920s there was very active Ku Klux Klan membership. As a result of the promotion of eugenics, New Haven had the international headquarters of research in eugenics in the 1920s. And Nazis came to New Haven, came to the United States to research and to meet with these founders of the eugenics movement so that they could determine how they were going to discriminate against Jews. So the story is a very long story.
And it's contemporary.
And it is contemporary. And I mean, none of us were living in the 1920s, or most of us were not living in the 1920s.
Yeah,
So,
we have
and
relatives.
and if we, exactly, and so that's the other thing is how did our churches find ways to participate in some of this discrimination, knowingly or unknowingly. These pieces of history are conveniently frequently lost, or the memory is kind of nicely erased. I've looked in some church records, and sheets of paper are torn out or missing or whatever. It's kind of amazing. There were people who really didn't want us to know some pieces of this history, and so it takes a lot of work. And a lot of patience. Reading 18th century handwriting is very different than reading anything that was written today. And so the other thing is gathering the people who will spend the time reading these documents and going into historical societies, going to the church's main archives, and meeting with Canon Farr. That's another piece of the work, so that you can bring that back and talk to people about it.
And perhaps talk a little bit about the work on the witness stones, because and the link back to this, because I think that's important.
Can you expound on what a witness stone is? I don't
Yeah,
think
well,
I'm not sure what that is.
So in Germany, to commemorate the lives of people who were killed by the Nazis, when you walk around cities like Berlin, you'll see a stone in the ground, kind of a brass plate, and it will have the in front of a house, and it will have the name of a person or a family that lived in the house, and perhaps the date that they died in Auschwitz.
Yeah.
And so Dennis Culloden, who was a middle school teacher in Guilford, used that concept to create witness stones, which are, again, kind of a brass plate that's on the surface of the sidewalk, or in front of a historic house, in the case of Trinity, it's in front of the church. And the church in Essex, and it has the names of enslaved people, perhaps the date they were freed, and sometimes just a brief description of the kind of work that they did.
So is that like people that were, like
No.
the example in Germany, it's like they would be in a person's house. Would that be like, we are working on that, would it be like when St. Paul's finishes the project and we put a stone, would it be like people that, maybe that's something we have to decide.
Well,
Or
I'll-
like
I'll
people
give
that
you-
were
I'll
like
give
you-
enslaved
who-
by them.
I'll give you an
Worship,
example.
or people who worshipped.
Worship,
Yeah, okay.
exactly. We have one person that we know of who's, whenever, if you go into the churchyard, look for it's right outside the side door as you go out. Our witness, well, we hope that we will get to the point where we think about whether we would make this our witness stone. But this was someone who was a verger. Both he and his brother served as vergers at St. Paul's.
What's a virgin?
The person who helps, like Fabian does, helps
Okay,
with,
Sex.
you know,
Sexton.
Oh, sexton.
or the sexton, exactly. And both he and his brother served. What we don't know is whether he was a freedman, and that's one of the things we're trying to research right now. We have found proof that his son was, because he wrote a letter saying, "My son is free and I want you to know that." But we weren't sure of his status. And so we're still trying to research, whether he was free or not, because he is a possible witness stone for us. He's buried here. We have his headstone right in the back there. And, we're thinking that he would be a good witness stone for us as we continue our research. But the research is so critical, as you mentioned. I mean, little things that you pass every day. The house that he lived in is still around, we discovered the other day. And we found Julie Hughes, who is she works at the Wilton Library, and she's a historian. She found for us a relative of this gentleman. And so I have to be in touch with him so that we can get a story from him, that will go with our history, the work that we've done. But practically every street is named after a slave owner. Selig Street. Any number of streets you mention in Norwalk are named after slave owners. So it's really interesting to work through the history. And who knows, we may eventually come up with a witness stone. But I thought it was important for you to know what's happening with witness stones. Wilton, we don't have a middle school, because one of the things that it requires is that you get middle schoolers involved, because when children get involved, it's very interesting. They want to know what's happening, how many people were there, and so when Sharon was doing it at Wilton, she invited us to bring some of our kids and come. And one or two of our kids did come. The Gahan children went with their mother. And they were fascinated by, all that. They were being taught things like, how do you know, because one of the kids said, when you look at a list of property, in order for you to know whether it's an enslaved person was there or not, their name wasn't there. They were either put down as servant or as part of, you have 3 donkeys and 3 servants or 5 servants. So this is how you knew through coded language how many enslaved persons there were. They were regarded as property when people made, and then there were some interesting stories. There was the story of the wife of this priest, who the priest himself had left a message saying, when I die, I would like my enslaved persons to be set free. And the wife said, out of the goodness of her heart, she couldn't bring herself to do this. So because she felt, she needed to look after them. And therefore she kept them enslaved and their descendants for another 2 decades. So you had things like that. He said, look at the language, where the language is condescending, so that you can see through it what was actually happening.
Gail, could you just mention the date that the history project is going to present, or roughly?
April 21st.
This is gonna be fabulous.
This will be our
For the whole
first,
congregation.
we're going to do some slides so that you see a little bit about St. Paul's, what we've discovered about St. Paul's since we've been doing the history project, but go ahead.
Oh,
And-
sorry,
and
this
big
gentleman.
one, yes.
I just, excuse me, want to say that
In some respects, I think reparations is sort of putting the cart before the horse. In the sense that, and Gail talked about it earlier, our community, it's a lot bigger than Norwalk or Westport. And we don't know each other in our community. And it's nice to hear historical stories, etc. But what are we doing today? What is our relationship to our neighbors in this community today? And I think if we spent an effort on that, we would better understand as to where these reparations should go. I'll just briefly say I've had a lot of experience in Bridgeport. Neither the Bridgeport community or the Westport community that I come from know each other. And it's a chore, a real big chore to get to know each other. And to me, that's where the effort should be, not the past. What are we doing now? We as an individual, what are we doing now? Not listening to what it was.
Also, you can do both.
Just
Right, you can also do both, like, the reparations is trying to think, well, the plan, also not just think, but do something practical now to try to do something right instead of only learning about like wrong things that happen. But also we can work on getting to know people, but it doesn't have to be like, we can't do any action until we get to know each other.
So with that, I just wanna make sure.
One thing is I hear it's been a wonderful discussion and I wish we had more and more hours. I'm looking forward to the future. I think that those teachable moments, I do believe in the saying, and I forget who it was that said, do not repeat. If you don't know your history, you will repeat it. And so I do not think we should just look, we definitely should get to know each other, look at what we could going forward, what's happening now. But if we don't, a lot of people were never taught about slavery in public. I went to public school or any school, probably private school too. And I think we need to know in an accessible form. The second thing I wanted you all to know, I would love to help. I love doing research. And so there's a history room in Norwalk Library, and I know of 2 professional historians that have done work on the history of slavery in Norwalk. I'll see if they're around still and can help in this research. I think it's very important for people to know what happened. Spend not all the time on it, but some of the time, because otherwise we will repeat our history, and we're seeing it happen now, in my opinion.
Yeah, hi. So I have to agree with her that we can do this all at the same time. We can, but I also want to let you know that at St. Paul's, we have sacred ground, which is one way for us to get to know each other and to understand our history. We're now at Circle 5, so we have about 45 people within our church here that have completed sacred ground. It teaches you the history that we haven't learned in our high schools or whatever in our educational system. And this brings us closer together because we do it in a small group, and and we understand where we missed out on our history, and there's no shaming, there's no guilt, but we try to move forward as a beloved community. So that's what we're trying to build here, and hopefully we can expand into the broader Norwalk community at some point.
Who in this room has taken sacred ground? Great. So
Okay, listen up,
so-
the rest
so
of you.
I'm actually looking at the people who don't have their hands up.
I'm signed up for the
We
next
said
one.
this last
I'm
round.
signed
It's
up
like,
for the
okay,
next
I
one.
think
Thank
we're
you.
almost at that
Sign
wonderful
up.
stage where we can start calling people in and say,
Yeah.
okay, join in. It's time. It's time.
Yeah.
And it really, I mean, I've taken it, and I will say what everyone else says is there's going to be a moment, no matter how much you know, where you'll be reading something or watching something, and you'll say, I can't believe this. Why do I know this? And how did this happen? And that doesn't happen just once, but it is a journey to freedom. You're like, wow, the feeling of knowing what I was kept from knowing is a little bit like the blinders falling. It's not like, there's some of this, but then there's work to do. So it to life.
Just one.
Lamont had something before you, Jenny. Go ahead, Lamont.
For those who are concerned about studying the past, I would say the past is present.
Hmm.
And verification of that. We look at this house across the street. What is the name of your resident?
How?
Okay. The third floor is where the priest held a slave. So when you come to this church, you're coming to a home, a place of worship. Just look to the third floor. There was a slave up there. Okay, so it's not past, it's present. And we're carrying that. We are concerned about guilt. We're carrying that memory with us. And I just throw that in.
Jenny?
Just to continue a little bit with the point about sacred ground, when we had our celebration the other day on Thursday evening, wonderful celebration of people who have done the program and people who are interested, one of the things we were urged to do was say, okay, what's next? What do we do? And, we came up with several things we could do, and one of them was having conversations like this. And I have to say, I am so pleased that this room is practically standing room only. This is great, and we need to continue this kind of conversation, pulling in more and more people from our parish, and eventually hopefully from outside. So, yeah.
Well, I think this was why Joy called this, we came up with the name Reparations 101, because we wanted to have a starting point. And I think the fact that all of you have come and everybody has asked questions, it's for me, this is a great starting point, Joy, anything you wanted to add?
Can I just say something about witness stones? I'm on their mailing list. You can get on their mailing list. They have, I believe, a Zoom coming this Thursday, and there's an African American museum in Stratford called the Fletcher, and he's going to be speaking. So Lamont and I have gone to a couple of their meetings. One of them was on complicity and where the state of Connecticut was involved in slavery and how much money they made. And another thing is, I was looking at the CPTV magazine that comes in, the Connecticut magazine. Look for the end of March. There's supposed to be something about the forgotten. And it's supposed to be about slavery in Connecticut. So there are places that there's information that's coming out, but I encourage you to get on the Witness Stone email list because they do have Zoom meetings. They meet in Guilford, but if you can't, you may be able, and it's amazing. I had no idea that Ivortown was because they had ivory from the elephants, and that people carried 600 pounds of ivory through Africa.
From East Africa.
Yeah.
I mean, I had no
Transported
idea.
to
And made
Connecticut.
piano keys out of it, and billiard balls. So this is our history in Connecticut. So I encourage everybody to keep an eye open, because there's stuff coming out that you can take it, you can learn more.
Yeah, and the ECCT website also has, they have the 175th anniversary, a recording of this service is on the website. And the General Convention meeting of the folks who are on the task force, there's a recording from 2022 and 2023 of their meeting in which they talk about resolutions 5, 6, and 7. And so on the YouTube channel for ECCT, you can see those.
Thank you so much.
That's my pleasure.
Thank you very much for being with us, Joy. We really appreciated your presence.
Absolutely.